My fusion system, fusing 1,000 chickens at the start. Chapter 241, You've won this match. Cheating. A huge question mark appeared on Watson's face. He had won with his strength, so what right did she have to say that he had cheated? He noticed Elvira's solemn expression when he gazed at her subconsciously. She did not frame him on purpose. Instead, she appeared to believe that he had cheated, rendering him helpless. He realized he had just employed a diamond-tier special ability. Elvira did not even know anything about platinum-tier abilities, so it was reasonable that she suspected him of cheating. If I had known earlier, I would have used magic or fighting skills to defeat her. Watson sighed and waved at Elvira. We won't count that then, Miss Elvira. From now on, I won't restrain your combat aura. Let's start again. You said it yourself. Tens of thousands of Torch Town residents, the astrologer, and the two mayors are watching this duel. I hope you're not lying. Elvira shook the dust off her body solemnly. Her body burst in a strong fire elemental combat aura, which condensed into blazing red wings. The scorching heat caused the rowdy audience to close their dry mouths. She employed the gold-tier combat method, Flame Dragon Descent, once again. She had morphed into a fire dragon, rose from the earth, and flew into the sky. Unlike before, she did not attack Watson directly. Instead, she rose higher into the clouds. She used the flames to burn the clouds into a red color. Amidst the crimson color, the clouds slowly rotated and sank, gradually turning into a giant sword that stretched for hundreds of meters. That massive sword was formed of flaming clouds, but it gave the illusion that it was stronger than steel. Elvira was in the heart of the blade. She was descending quickly as if there was a giant in the sky wielding a weapon capable of splitting the ground. She slashed down on the entire arena with her sword. Peak gold-tier fighting technique, Heavenly Fire Unsheathing. That was a fighting technique that Elvira had yet to master completely. It required her to burn herself and the clouds in the sky to turn into a giant sword. If she did not perform it well, it was very likely that she would hurt herself. However, that move was also more powerful than the Flame Dragon's descent. When the clouds in the sky collapsed, a massive sword engulfed in flames descended to the ground. The entire arena was on fire. Many of the spectators backed away in concern that it would have an impact on them. They were applauding and chanting for Elvira at the same time. Even though they were in the audience seats, they still had the illusion that the hair on their bodies, including their clothes, was burning, not to mention Watson, who was at the center of the attack. Crack! The rough rocky ground beneath Watson's feet cracked with a succession of crunching sounds before Elvira's sword crashed onto his skull. Rocks flew everywhere. Watson opened his arms as he raised his head to stare at the flames that fell from the sky. Thick vines grew from his flesh. Those were the world tree's branches, and they took root in the dirt. They expanded into thick tree trunks that twisted together to form a massive and tenacious barrier. Boom! With a loud bang, the enormous flaming sword and the giant wooden shield collided. The tree shield emitted a mushroom cloud that combined with streaming flames. The shield was in perfect condition, only a portion of it had been burned black. The impact sent Elvira's body flying. She landed on the ground and slid away. She used the thin sword to support her body. What a strong defense! To be able to summon so many trees in an instant, that must be a gold-tier spell. Is that young man a gold-tier mage? Elvira was taken aback since she had not expected Watson to be able to block a move that was beyond her capabilities. It was not the same as before that. She had been able to employ all of her strength, and she also performed admirably. Watson's ability to block her strike was enough to demonstrate his strength in such situations. A gold-tier mage at that age shocked her even more. She had not understood why Antonio had taken Watson as his disciple before, but she came to a realization then. Elvira gathered her thoughts swiftly. A battle does not always imply that the strong will triumph. It was all about skill in a fight. She believed that with her many years of war expertise, she would be able to beat a stronger opponent. Gold tier fighting technique, Flame Dragon Descent. Elvira abruptly halted her retreat and dashed at Watson at a breakneck pace. She transformed into a swift flaming light and flew through the dense forest. Every branch of the world tree called by Watson was as thick as a python. It was chilling to look at, but the thick branches had a drawback. Elvira used the branches as a deterrent to make Watson's onslaught more difficult. Watson muttered, "Stargazing tarot cards, activate." Elvira's shield of world tree branches cracked. It caused starlight in the sky to fall and shrivel in the light before transforming into palm-sized golden cards. Those cards zoomed right at Elvira the moment they appeared. There were 24 cards in total, each engraved with a different image and loaded with diverse energies. Some cards were encased in lightning, while others were covered in a layer of invisible gauze. There were also cards that were surrounded by the phantom of a golden chariot. They were filled with power. The 24 cards surrounded Elvira like a storm, causing her to frantically use the thin sword in her hand to bounce the cards away. Fortunately, the sword in her hand was a gold-tier weapon called the Waltz Blade. Otherwise, it would have been damaged in that fierce collision. Watson and Elvira engaged in a heated fight. The audience in the adjacent stands held their breath, and their eyes were bright with anticipation. They were there to see Elvira win, but they were also ecstatic to be able to see such a great fight. Watson, who was only a little more than 10 years old at the time, was able to fight Elvira to a halt, which impressed them. That was the way the world was. The powerful would be revered no matter where they traveled. Watson had used his power to gain the respect of everyone there. The audience felt Watson and Elvira were evenly matched, but Elvira, who was in the middle of the fight, did not feel the same. She had only fought the 24 golden cards for a few dozen seconds, but she felt as if she had fought for days and nights with dozens of people with big hammers. Her shoulders ached, and she could not even grasp the hilt of her sword. Those cards appear to be gold-tier weapons. Watson must be a mage. How does he know how to create weapons and use advanced swordsmanship to control them for an attack? Is he more than a mage? Elvira swung her sword around and pushed a few cards that went at her in a graceful curve. The more she moved, the more she was startled. The mechanism for managing those magical cards was magical, but it was more than that. Watson was obviously skilled in combat as well. It was difficult to believe that a 10-year-old child could learn both magic and combat tactics. At that moment, she realized the wide gap between her and Watson. If it had been a talent competition, she would have conceded loss long ago. Elvira clutched her small blade and charged left and right under the siege of the 24 astrology tarot cards for a full 10 minutes. She utilized all of her abilities but was still unable to charge forward. "Watson, other than these small tricks, do you dare to meet me head-on?" She had no choice but to put down the sword in her hand as she panted. "Do you have any fighting skills? It is too unpleasant for a warrior to battle with tricks." She found the fight to be extremely suffocating. She would prefer a chance to hit Watson. "All right, Miss Elvira, as you wish." Watson nodded as he stood outside, controlling the astrology tarot cards, and watched coldly from the side. The temperature decreased a few degrees when he stretched his right hand outward. An ice-condensed weapon was in his palm. A tangled ice wolf and ice dragon sculpture were at the end of the weapon. It appeared for a split second before exploding, transforming into translucent ice crystals and vanishing from Elvira's sight. That was the fighting technique that Watson had fused with the Northwind mercenary group's leader, Ron. He had obtained the peak gold-tier battle technique, the Thousand-Blade Ice Soul Blade. It had the ability to combine within a range of 100 meters freely. Watson had limited his power to the gold tier when he fought against Elvira. That was due to his fear of displaying more powerful strength. Elvira would not understand and would suspect him of cheating again. At the time, he did not oppose Elvira's suggestion. He did that to test how much of a difference his combat level made when compared to a battle-hardened leader of the same level. Watson waved his hand and let the 24 tarot cards leave Elvira's body. He seized the hilt of the thousand-blade ice soul blade and converted all of his combat aura to the ice attribute. He kept it at the gold tier. 2 ice crystal wings erupted from his back. Watson transformed into a stream of light as his wings flapped, arriving in front of Elvira. "Miss Elvira, how about using the swords to determine the winner?" "Come on." Elvira abruptly raised the sword in her grip. The blade was engulfed in raging flames. The flares descended to the ground, forming a flaming serpent that swirled and soared at Watson as if it wanted to rip him apart. Ice crystals appeared around Watson and combined to form a massive ice dragon. Ice and fire, dragons, and snakes, everything collided and turned into a melting white fog and drowned Watson and Elvira's figures. Who won? One by one, the audience in the stands rose to their feet. Even the mayors, like Lubin and Gerant, stood up. The combat was tremendously exciting, and their blood was boiling. Many of them had placed bets on Elvira. However, they did not care who had won or lost. At that point, they only wanted a conclusion for the battle. After a few minutes of waiting, the ice fog dispersed, revealing Watson and Elvira's figures. They stood with their backs against each other. Elvira's armor was unscathed, while Watson's clothes on his shoulder had been cut open. 2 shallow sword wounds appeared, accompanied by scorch marks left by the flames. Watson dispersed the ice crystal sword condensed from the gold tier fighting technique as he released his right hand. He laughed as he lowered his head to examine the wound on his shoulder. "It seems like there is a gap between me and the experienced commander in terms of fighting techniques, especially among those in the same level. Miss Elvira, you have won this match." Chapter 242, Art is Explosion. Watson's voice was not loud, but it was audible in the otherwise silent arena. The fusion technology could give him skills directly, but it could not give him combat abilities. As a result, as he was fighting Elvira, who was also a gold tier warrior, she had managed to stab him in the shoulders. Their attacks were only a few inches apart, but the result was completely different. That was the distinction in combat experience. It was no surprise. The opponents he fought might be instantaneously killed by the system's ability, leaving him with limited opportunities to fight. As his strength grew, his situation would change. The stronger he became, the slower his strength grew. He could crush his rivals because he was a dual-class platinum tier elite, while most of his foes were silver or gold tier elites. When he entered the diamond tier and faced those old monsters that were diamond tier or beyond, the disparity in experience would make it more difficult for him to fight. Even though the kingdom only had one diamond tier elite, who knew if there were other elites in other places? Furthermore, his goal was to deal with the king. Therefore he should plan for such a day. The best way to improve his actual combat experience was to have a teacher. Watson was debating whether he should employ a sword master from the royal city to educate him. He had Antonio teach him magic so he would not have to worry about that. However, he had always struggled with combat aura when he trained on his own. In comparison to a mage, he clearly lacked a warrior's training. During his battle with Elvira, he recognized certain issues, but he did not care if he won or lost. It was preferable to lose to Elvira than to be at a disadvantage in the same situation in the future. The only pity was that, according to the agreement, he could not continue to assist Torch Town in its transformation. Thus, Lubin would be quite disappointed. He could already imagine Lubin's snot and tears begging him not to leave. Black Moon Town has admitted defeat. Commander Elvira has won. While Watson was deep in thought, the residents in the arena cheered. Some of them were already hugging each other. Elvira's voice broke through the commotion at that precise moment. "Wait a minute, Watson. In fact, I was the one who lost that fight." What had happened? When the crowd, which was already ecstatic, heard the voice from the stage, they looked perplexed. Watson was evidently injured as a result of their sword combat. He should be the one to lose. Why would Elvira admit defeat? Elvira swung around and stared at Watson, ignoring the surrounding noises. "Watson, Tell me the truth. Did you not use all of your strength when you fought me just now? Why did he not use his full strength? Was that not Watson's full strength in that fight? The crowd was even more dumbfounded. I did not expect Miss Elvira to notice that. Watson touched his head and revealed a shy smile. Elvira let out a long breath. She sounded unhappy. I realized something was wrong halfway through the battle. You clearly had the power to defeat me, but you deliberately used magic tricks to try to exhaust me. If I had not suggested a quick and decisive battle, you would have used that method to defeat me. It's a shame for any knight not to use all of their strength in a duel. Are you underestimating me? I did not mean that, but if I had used all of my strength, things would become very troublesome. How troublesome? Elvira showed a look of disbelief. Watson, I'm admitting defeat because I know I'm not your match. I can't deceive myself, but that doesn't mean I'm convinced. If you don't let me see your true strength, I'm afraid I won't be able to admit defeat wholeheartedly. You won't reject my request, right? That. Watson looked troubled. He had wanted to go all out to win that battle, but Elvira insisted that he had cheated. He had no choice but to suppress his strength at the gold tier. Unexpectedly, after he lost to Elvira, the other party felt dissatisfied. It had been really difficult for him. Apart from determining that he lacked battle experience, he also decided that he should never fight with women, especially irrational ones, after that conflict. That would be disastrous. Watson sighed as he reflected on that thought. Miss Elvira, it will be extremely dangerous for you to stand in front of me if I were to release my true strength. Please take a step back. How far back? 100 meters. Elvira put the thin sword back into the sheath at her waist and walked backward for 100 meters. The entire arena was only 400 to 500 meters in length and width. Elvira was about half a distance away from Watson, so she felt that it was enough. No, Miss Elvira, 100 meters is far from enough. You will need to step outside the arena. Watson shook his head. Elvira's forehead furrowed, and her expression was weird when she heard that. She could only demolish the ground within a 100-meter radius if she utilized her full strength to cast the heavenly fire unsheathing. The entire stadium was a few thousand square meters, and the surrounding stands were significantly larger. Watson meant that he could destroy nearly 10,000 square meters in a single move. How was that possible? It's not only you, Miss Elvira, but all the spectators in the arena had better go right now. My master and the border count will form a protective shield. That's the only way to ensure your safety. All right, I will evacuate everyone in the arena now. Elvira fixed her gaze on Watson. Even though she did not believe Watson's strength was as great as he said, she followed his instructions. That was because she was very interested in Watson's true power. Listen to me, everyone. Please leave the arena. The opponent from the Black Moon Town will cast a powerful spell. It will be very dangerous if you continue to stay here. Elvira used her combat aura to amplify her voice. She began to evacuate the spectators in the stands. Out of respect for her, 80% of the people left the arena obediently. However, a small number of the more rebellious ones did not go. Watson, do you really intend to use all your strength? Aren't you worried that Torch Town will be destroyed? Sylvan asked in a worried tone. While Elvira did her job, Lubin and the others went to see Watson from the viewing platform. It's fine. We have Master and Lord Sylvan to keep an eye on things. Furthermore, it doesn't matter if Torch Town is destroyed. The purpose of my visit is to rebuild Torch Town. Since Miss Elvira has admitted defeat, there's no need for me to leave. It will be easier to rebuild it after it is destroyed, Watson replied with a smile. Lubin rushed forward when Torch Town was mentioned. He apologized as he wiped the chilly sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. Young Master Watson, the battle just now should have finished a long time ago. It is all Elvira's fault that she did not give up. Forget it, she even accused you of cheating. Do not worry. I will talk to her and remove her as the Torch Knight's commander. I will make sure that she is punished for this. The battle had made Lubin's heart pounded, and his hands and feet were numb. He felt the world had darkened when Watson admitted his defeat. If Watson lost, he would have to leave Torch Town. Who else would help to develop Torch Town for the better? It was all Elvira's fault, that stupid woman with a brain of muscles. Lubin pondered that hatefully in his heart. He stared at Elvira's back, who was evacuating the crowd. Plus, Elvira even said that she wanted to witness Watson's true strength. It was extremely foolish. What if Watson used his full strength to pulverize Torch Town? After he heard Sylvan tell Antonio that Watson was a platinum-tier dual-class elite, he did not doubt that Watson could do that. Young Master Watson, I know that you are powerful. Elvira is not your match. You don't need to prove anything to her. Let's find a place to discuss the matter of rebuilding the town. Lubin smiled apologetically at Watson. Initially, he respected Watson because of the close relationship between Watson and those important figures. Watson's strength had already convinced him. Mayor Lubin, go take a rest. After all, I promised Miss Elvira that I would show my strength. I can't go back on my words, Watson replied and walked to the side to warm up. Lubin moved his lips and was about to say something when Antonio cut him off. Let us do it according to Watson's plan. My disciple has always been busy with fusing items for his family. He is always thinking about others but rarely about himself. He had finally made a request. How can we reject him? I also want to know how powerful he is anyway. Master Antonio, you are too doting on your disciple. Lubin could not say it out loud, he could only follow Sylvan and Antonio out of the arena. The arena was nearly empty in 20 minutes. There were a lot of people outside. Many people glanced through the entrance and talked about it. The boy from Black Moon Town wants to show off his magic. Why should we leave? Does he think he is powerful enough to destroy the entire arena? Forget about Commander Elvira. Even Lord Sylvan and Master Antonio are out here, and they even used magic to set up a protective barrier outside the arena. Is this not making a mountain out of a molehill? There's no need for Commander Elvira to admit defeat. Perhaps that kid isn't strong enough and is intentionally scaring us. Some people had heard that Watson had held back in the fight with Elvira, and she wanted to see his true strength. She also wanted to prevent them from saying that she had lost on purpose. They could understand Elvira's feelings, but they did not know why he was making such a huge deal out of nothing. In the arena, Watson concluded his warm-up exercises and took a look around. He saw a few folks seated sparsely at the top of the audience seats. Except for him, the entire arena was nearly empty. Antonio and Sylvan had also set up a protective shield for the people within it. Very good. Now I can cast my magic without worry. Watson stretched his muscles and closed his eyes. He had progressed all the way to the platinum tier since he had transmigrated to that realm. During that period, he had fused various spells, and fighting abilities, some of which were powerful and others were not. He felt it was really difficult to choose the strongest one. In that case, he might as well not choose at all. Instead, he would reveal everything he had learned. What was his real strength? It was to fuse all the abilities he had obtained into one. That was his true strength. Watson took a deep breath and activated the fusion system. In an instant, all the abilities he had mastered flashed across his mind. They were like strands of light that could split the heavens and earth. Dozens of powerful platinum-tier spells and even more gold-tier skills, all of those fused to create a massive explosion that blew his consciousness away. He faintly heard a system notification. Congratulations, Master, for fusing all of your current abilities. You have obtained a peak diamond tier spell, Absolute Explosion. Chapter 243, Destruction of Heaven and Earth. Diamond tier pinnacle spell, Absolute Explosion, consumes all of one's strength and grants the explosion attribute to everything in sight, causing a large-scale explosion. The power of the blast depends on the strength consumed, from destroying a city to destroying an entire continent. The price is that the host will enter a state of exhaustion after releasing the spell. The information appeared in his mind after the fusion. Watson's body transformed into a ray of light. With him as the focal point, anything that came into contact with him, whether soil, rock, or air, would be transformed into explosive substances. Then it transformed into pure flames and light, which spread in all directions. The ground had collapsed. For a few meters, the entire arena had sunk, and everything was engulfed in flames. The massive stone pillars that stood in all directions were insignificant in the face of the expanding explosion flames. They were shattered into stones in an instant. The massive stones were tumbling down, they were engulfed in flames before they even touched the ground. The rocks became the source of the explosion after the fire contaminated them. The massive stones shattered into pieces, and the pieces shattered into powder. The explosion sent the Torch Town residents who did not leave the arena more than 100 meters into the sky. They were foaming at the mouth, and their eyes were swirling in a vortex. They could not even scream because they were protected by a platinum-tier shield created by Sylvan and Antonio. However, they did not perish. Their charred and soft limbs demonstrated that they had both burns and bone fractures. What is that? The Torch Town residents stood outside the circular arena as they looked at the world engulfed in flames. They were perplexed. Some were unable to speak, and others were so terrified that they had to sit down. They had no idea what had happened. They could not even come up with a name for the magic in front of them. They only knew that it had destroyed the entire arena in an instant. There would have been no dregs left if they had not listened to Elvira's words and escaped. Those who thought Elvira was making a big deal out of nothing were extremely lucky. Elvira was also in the crowd. Her yellow pupils reflected the enlarging flames, and her skin was pale. She was a gold-tier warrior known for having a fire elemental combat aura. However, in front of Watson's attack at the time, her attack was like a firefly compared to the sun. That is Watson's true strength. No wonder he was holding back when he fought with me. If he did not hold back, the entire Torch Town would be destroyed. Elvira sighed. With Sylvan and Antonio's combined efforts, they barely managed to use the magical shield to cover the explosion in the circular arena. The high temperature and impact had deformed the shield, which could be seen in the distance. Its color had also changed from translucent to light red as if the flames consumed it. A high temperature from afar almost suffocated her. Without that shield, the heat from the flames would be enough to cause the people nearby to combust spontaneously. Elvira had no idea what level of attack that was, but she knew it was beyond the capabilities of a gold-tier elite. You need to put in more effort, Sylvan. I can't hold on much longer. Antonio floated in midair with a staff shaped like a tree branch that emitted a diamond-like light. The staff radiated extreme coldness that froze space and time and transformed it into a semi-transparent protective shield. There were dozens of black holes of various sizes on the side of the shield closest to him, emitting a strong, attractive force and absorbing the expanding flames. That was the peak platinum-tier spells, Absolute Zero and Super Big Black Holes. Antonio specialized in both. The former was used to stop the explosion, while the latter absorbed the explosion's flames. Typically, no matter how powerful the explosion, it would not withstand the simultaneous absorption of so many black holes. Watson's explosion, on the other hand, was spectacular. Everything engulfed by the blast would explode simultaneously, resulting in waves of explosions from within the shield. Each wave grew stronger. Antonio, who had been continuously casting dozens of platinum-tier spells, panted profusely. He murmured to himself, "I never taught Watson such a powerful spell. Its strength was already inferior to that of a diamond-tier spell. What source did Watson use to learn it? Could he have relied on his talent to develop it on his own? That would be far too frightening. Master, I'm already trying my best to control the shield." Sylvan, on the other hand, struggled to utter a sentence after he heard Antonio's words. He cast the Absolute Zero spell with one hand while he maintained the shield with the other. He attempted to control the flames with a spell called Flame Control. As the most powerful mage in the kingdom, he specialized in controlling fire elemental spells. However, the essence of Watson's spell was not fire but explosions. The flames were merely a byproduct. As he attempted to control the fire, a magical wave seeped from the shield and tried to connect with his body as if it wanted to turn him into an explosive object. He was so terrified that he gave up right away. The illusion that his body was about to explode vanished after he relinquished control of the fire. However, the protective shield that was in direct contact with the fire changed at that moment. The shield, which had been burned for half a day, had turned red and completely assimilated. On the surface, there were bulges filled with bubbles. No one knew when they would detonate. The super big black holes spell that Antonio had cast was also burning red from inside the shield. They had mutated into heavenly bombs that rapidly expanded and exploded. The magical explosion and the protective shield on their side had both worn out. A crack appeared on the protective shield when the two were superimposed on each other. A wisp of fire snake the size of an arm was released inside the shield. It flew across the street in the direction of the arena. Boom, boom, boom. Continuous explosions could be heard. The street was turned into explosives after the flames touched it, and it was blasted into the air. The manors on both sides of the road were also affected and exploded one by one. A cloud of black smoke accompanied the raging flames. Broken stones and wood chips rained down from the sky, still exploding. Fortunately, almost everyone in town had gathered in the circular arena to watch Elvira's match. There was no one in the manors at the moment. Otherwise, who knows how many people would have died from that. The arena is going to explode. Everyone, run! Be careful of the flames in the sky. If those flames touch us, we will also explode. Residents who were standing outside the arena screamed and fled. They reasoned that with Antonio and Sylvan nearby, they would be able to watch in peace. However, they discovered that the environment was not safe. A single flame would obliterate a street. If the fire were to spread, it would be effortless to destroy the entire Torch Town. Watson, that brat! We said he could demonstrate his strength. We never said anything about destroying the town. I will teach him a lesson when he comes out. Antonio sighed as he realized the protective shield could no longer keep him safe. His platinum hair had a layer of light, and his lashes and pupils had also become white. Hundreds of layers of time aura had appeared on his body. It seemed like his aura had unexpectedly risen to the diamond tier. Yes, as the border count, I have to talk to him too. He needs to control his power and not use such powerful magic in the future. There are only 4 towns on the entire border, including Fairy Town. Who would I seek restitution from if he destroyed one? Almost simultaneously, Sylvan complained and cast the time-stripping spell. His hair had turned completely white, and his body emitted a faint light. The protective barrier that sealed the flames strengthened after the two of them entered the diamond tier. The flames' destruction could no longer keep up with the shield's self-repair speed. After they stabilized the shield, the two cast a few wind elemental spells in the sky to gradually detonate all the explosives that fell from the sky so that the residents would not be harmed. Then, Sylvan and Antonio raised their hands simultaneously, and they cast earth elemental spells to summon several giant rock golems. They uprooted the arena, which had already melted into a massive fireball, along with the protective shield, and threw them ruthlessly into the sky. Boom! A blinding light exploded in the sky in an instant. There was a loud bang, and then everyone's ears went silent. They were only aware of the piercing pain in their eardrums. They closed their eyes, but even then, they could feel the burning light that stabbed through their eyelids. The explosion lasted several minutes before dissipating. The clouds in the sky had vanished completely. There was not a single cloud within a 10-kilometer radius of Torch Town. They could see a bright sky and a sun emitting a red light. Torch Town, located beneath the explosion, was made of rock, so only the houses' roofs were destroyed. The majority of the mud and wood had collapsed. Torch Town appeared to have been hit by a hurricane after the explosion. 1/3 of the houses have been destroyed. It's finally over. At least 2 Diamond-tier elites were needed to thwart Watson's attack. If Sylvan and I were not here today, the consequences would be dire. Antonio wiped the sweat from his brow as he noticed the explosion had subsided. He cast a time reversal spell and landed in the original circular arena. The majestic arena had vanished, leaving only a golden sculpture on the ground. Watson was the one who created it. Half of its body had been blown away, and it was sinking into the partially melted soil. When Antonio descended, he discovered a person on the ground. His clothes were scorched black, and his small face was filthy and sour. He was coughing and touching the ground. Who else could it be but Watson? Do you realize what you just did, Watson? Antonio's heart softened when he saw Watson in such a miserable state. Even though he was aware of the massive destruction that Torch Town had suffered, as well as the danger posed by Watson's magic, he maintained a straight face. I apologize, Master. I just wanted to see how the effect of fusing the existing magic would look. I did not expect such powerful devastation. Master, could you help me up and make a wish for me using the Wish for the World ring so that I can regain my strength? The ashes on the ground stained Watson's lips as he spoke, causing him to cough twice more. His strength had been exhausted, so he did not have any strength left. The power of the magic that he had fused was enormous. He estimated that, without any protective measures, it was enough to destroy the entire Torch Town, but the cost was high. He had no control over that spell. He would definitely use up all of his stamina if he were to attack. It was impossible to save even a little bit of his strength. He had wanted to see how strong he could be when he attacked with all of his might. He had stopped before he could cause any damage. Who would have guessed that the spell he had fused would be unstoppable? Chapter 244, The Town's Transformation. Watson stood up from the ground with a pale face 10 minutes later, thanks to Antonio's recovery magic and the Wish for the World ring. Only his back, limbs, and buttocks were in pain. He rubbed his aching joints as he looked around at Torch Town's cracked streets and collapsed houses. Even he was taken aback by the scene. Fortunately, he had only used his own power and not the Diamond-tier source of magic in his body when he had released the absolute explosion. Even if Antonio and Sylvan had used all of their skills, they would not have been able to stop him. After releasing the absolute explosion, some unfathomable knowledge appeared in his mind. It was about the Diamond-tier. Whether it was Diamond-tier spells or combat skills, they were all labeled as absolute. It could extract a person's combat aura and magic, just like the absolute seal he had fused in the duel. If a Platinum-tier elite could become one with heaven and earth when they were in contact, then a Diamond-tier elite would already have mastered the heaven and earth's rules, such as the absolute explosion. Its purpose was to imbue any object it touched with the characteristics of an explosion. Explosions would produce light and flames. Those two would not blow up on their own. They could, however, explode on their own after acquiring the characteristics of an explosion. Watson could assign stones, flowing water, and even grass with the attributes of an explosion for as long as he wanted. Then, each stone on a path could be a bomb, and each drop of water in a river could be a destructive force. How terrifying would it be if those powers were combined? The rules were unbreakable. In the face of the rules, any magic or fighting technique would be useless. Similarly, the rules were limitless. Watson understood the rules of explosion and seal. Others might be able to understand those two rules too, or even more. One of the requirements for entering the Diamond-tier was to master at least one rule and study it thoroughly. Watson had mastered 2 rule-based spells and had already passed the Diamond-tier threshold. He did not lack comprehension but the number of spells and combat aura. That would take days or months to accumulate, and he was not worried about it. He had advanced to Platinum-tier. However, after he fused the Absolute Explosion spell and learned about Diamond tier, his realm soared like a rocket to reach the pinnacle of Platinum tier. Do you realize how dangerous the spell you just cast, Watson? It was almost impossible for Master and I to block it. If we fail, everyone in Torch Town will perish as a result of your actions. As Watson was deep in thought, Sylvan descended from the sky and appeared in front of him, reprimanding him. Not only was Torch Town destroyed, but he had also used the time-stripping spell to stop Watson. The time-stripping spell was a divine ability that allowed one's level to grow in a short amount of time. The cost was that it would deplete one's past self. It was possible that the more he used it, the weaker it became. He had spent at least a year's worth of savings to stop Watson's attack. His heart was in excruciating pain. He raised his head and turned to face Watson as the young boy apologized to him. "Please accept my apologies, Lord Sylvan. I've made a mistake." He breathed a sigh of relief. Previously, he had regarded Watson as an elite on par with him. He would even overlook Watson's age, who was only 10 years old. Watson had been too perfect, he did not appear human. He felt a little more relaxed when he knew that Watson could make mistakes, and he thought the place had looked much better. "Watson, I will forgive you because you admitted your mistake. Tell me how you cast that spell." Sylvan's face softened as he asked about it. Aside from reprimanding Watson, he was also very interested in the spell. His strongest fire elemental spell, the Vermillion Nova, was less than 1/10 the size of the spell Watson had released. If he could master that spell, his strength would increase tenfold. "I created the spell accidentally when I combined all my skills. Do you want to learn it, Lord Sylvan? I can teach you if you wish to learn it. However, that spell is at the Diamond tier, so it may be a little difficult." Watson responded modestly, "Furthermore, there is a flaw in that spell. When activated, it depletes one's current physical strength. I would not be able to stand up now if I had not just advanced to the peak of the Platinum tier, even if a recovery spell healed me." "A Diamond tier spell? Ascend to the peak of the Platinum tier?" When he heard half of it, the corner of Sylvan's mouth twitched. His attention had shifted from the spell. A fused Diamond tier spell was nothing when compared to attaining the status of a Platinum tier elite. He knew that because he had been in that tier for more than 10 years. Watson had recently been promoted to the Platinum tier. How long had it been since he had ascended to the Platinum tier? Would Watson reach the Diamond tier in 2 days? How could someone in the world cultivate so quickly? He had thought that Watson, who had made a mistake, was cute. He did not think so anymore. The young man in front of him was certainly not human. "You can't only teach it to Sylvan, Watson. Don't you intend to share such a wonderful thing with me?" Antonio stepped in from the side. He did not look like Watson's master but more like Watson's disciple. However, what could he do? He did not know any Diamond tier spell either. He was not surprised that Watson had fused spells from that tier because he knew that Watson had created an element that did not belong in that world. The boy could even create a new element, so a Diamond tier spell was nothing. When it came to new elements, he had yet to learn Watson's chaotic elemental spell. It looked like he would learn it alongside the Diamond tier spell. Antonio made his decision and smiled. He did not care that the spell was flawed and would drain all of his stamina every time he cast it. He would be in big trouble if he overexerted himself in the face of multiple foes. He was unconcerned. In a desperate situation, the first thing he would do is cast a spell. If he were in a desperate situation, he would employ multiple methods. Furthermore, given the spell's strength, his enemies would be reduced to ashes in a single move. So what if he wore himself out? The two elites were calculating how to maximize Watson's benefits. Lubin had already arrived, along with Gerant, Andre, and the residents of Torch Town. Elvira was one of them. Elvira's gaze toward Watson was no longer as aggressive as it had been. Instead, it was filled with admiration and a tinge of fear. The officials behind her stared at Watson with pure fear in their eyes. It is just as we had expected. You are the kingdom's youngest mage, but your single spell has the power to eradicate a town. Still, if at all possible, I hope that young Master Watson would not destroy my town. I have just sent someone to do the math. Torch Town has lost 31 roads and 105 houses as a result of the recent explosion, and more than 5,000 people suffered minor injuries to their eyes and ears. There are also an uncountable number of damaged items. Lubin forced a smile as his heart pounded in his chest. Hundreds of thousands of gold coins had been stolen from Torch Town, and they had amassed quite a collection over the years. Unfortunately, he did not want to lose his cool in front of Watson. He was terrified after he saw Watson's power. Gerant, an enemy force, could not even ridicule Lubin any longer after he saw his miserable expression. He said, "You asserted that you wanted to assist Torch Town in its transformation, young Master Watson. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that half of Torch Town has been destroyed? To tell you the truth, that was my intention." Watson smiled sweetly. "Then, young Master Watson, time is of the essence. Shall we begin now?" Lubin appeared ecstatic. Watson's words did not frighten him. He had seen Watson constructed a 1,000-kilometer-long passage in an instant, so Torch Town's transformation would not be any different. It should not be difficult to return the town to its original state in at least a day. As a result, the residents would not have to sleep on the streets because their homes had been destroyed. Watson did not hesitate after his promise to Lubin. He extended his hand toward the town in front of him. "Gold-biter rats, come out!" Squeak, squeak, squeak. A series of shudder-inducing mouse squeaks echoed. The circular arena's ground flipped open as gold-biter rats scurried outward with platinum-colored ores in their mouths. Arg! It is a swarm of demon rats. There are so many demon rats. Not only did he destroy half of Torch Town and our houses, but he had also summoned a swarm of demon rats. What on earth is he trying to do? When the residents of Torch Town saw the rats crawling out of the ground, they were forced to flee. Their expressions were a mix of hatred and fear. Many of their kin had perished in the jaws of those demon beasts. They could not keep their emotions in check after they saw those magical beasts. "Lord Mayor, I believe we need to get rid of those demon rats before we can rebuild the town. These magical beasts have terrorized our residents and harmed our town. Their mere presence here is a form of blasphemy against the dead. There are thousands of different ways to construct a town. I can't tolerate this." Elvira took a step forward and drew her sword from her waist. It would have been fine if she had not spoken, but Lubin erupted like a volcano when she did. He was enraged. "Be quiet, everyone, especially you, Elvira. I have put up with you for a long time. Do not tell me about your flimsy sense of honor anymore. Can you repair Torch Town? If you can't do it, then don't say anything. Can you please keep quiet? Young Master Watson has already subdued those magical beasts. They will not cause any harm. All you have to do is stand back and keep an eye on young Master Watson." Watson would not have fought in a duel had it not been for Elvira. He would have destroyed the town if he had not fought the duel. He would not have summoned the gold-biter rats if he had not destroyed the town. How could Elvira rebuild the town when she still had to clear out the gold-biter rats? Lubin was on the verge of passing out from rage. It was beneficial to have a sense of collective honor, but it would take time. Lubin remembered that he had signed a contract to become an affiliated town with Black Moon Town. He had felt humiliated at the time, but things had changed. He felt extremely fortunate because he discovered that a sense of honor would only be genuine after one gained more strength. A sense of honor in the absence of power was nothing more than ridiculous stupidity and self-satisfaction. He had thought that Elvira was a rare cultivation genius, and he had to rack his brains to entice her. However, ever since he had witnessed a genuine genius, Watson, Elvira's standing in his eyes had plummeted. The people of Torch Town fell silent after he finished venting his rage. They only looked at Watson with skepticism. They admitted that Watson's strength terrified them so much that they would have nightmares if they thought about it at night. However, destroying a city was not the same as building one. The things they lost due to the explosion would not be restored, no matter what Watson did. Watson began to act precisely as they predicted. "Begin," he said to the gold-biter rats. The rats immediately dove into the soil and vanished. They had already left the city when they reappeared. The gold-biter rats emerged at the city's outskirts, not far from Torch Town. They numbered in the hundreds of thousands. There was no shortage of silver and gold-tier elite magical beasts among them. They built a wall out of platinum ore, then houses and streets on top of it. Hundreds of thousands of gold-biter rats could devour a city in a matter of minutes. Similarly, they could build a city in the same time frame. Finally, a town made of platinum ore appeared in less than a half hour. The town's layout was similar to Torch Town's, but it seemed to be in rough shape. "What is he up to?" Everyone was taken aback. They had no idea why Watson would build a similar town outside. It was apparent he attempted to repair Torch Town rather than melting the ore to fill the streets. Something was wrong with that. Watson smiled and extended his right hand to the town outside the city as if sensing their emotions. "Do not worry. The show is about to begin." Chapter 245, God's Miracle. The show has just begun. The system has fused. Everyone turned to look outside the town after hearing Watson's words. They noticed that the platinum ore that the gold-biter rats had piled up outside Torch Town had instantly transformed into a massive stream of light, enveloping and fusing with it. Whoosh! Torch Town's residents heard a strange vibration from their surroundings, but it was muffled. They looked around subconsciously. A beam of light spread out from the town's center, and everything changed wherever it went. The streets, which had been destroyed, were now whole. The street's ground had morphed from ordinary rocks to platinum metal. The buildings that the explosion had wrecked vanished on the spot, leaving majestic spiked palaces that flickered with a faint platinum light in their place. They drew people's attention in the same way that castles do in fairy tales. Not only were the houses different, but so were the walls and trees planted on both sides of the street. The walls ranged in height from more than 10 meters to 100 meters. They were as smooth as mirrors, and the trees on both sides of the street had grown thicker and bigger than before, with colorful fruits that emitted a delicate fragrance. Its smell made one feel as if their cultivation rate had increased. If someone with professional knowledge of medicinal herbs were there, they would immediately recognize that the fruits were of the silver-tier variety. "Congratulations on successfully fusing them, Master. You have obtained a platinum-tier building, Torch Town." Platinum-tier building, Torch Town. Abilities: the town is constructed from platinum-tier ores and super-hot stones. It possesses high-tier physical and magic resistance. At the same time, it also can radiate heat, allowing the town to function as one throughout the 4 seasons. Additional abilities: Flight, Platinum Protective Shield, can be activated when in danger to block platinum-tier attacks. Spirit of the Torch, casting and learning fire elemental magic in Torch Town will have its effects doubled. Growth ability: all crops and herbs grown in the town will be upgraded to silver tier. Forging ability: weapons forged in the town will also be upgraded to silver tier. High temperature heat ray, release the energy of the super hot stones hidden in the city walls, creating a light and heat attack comparable to platinum tier fire magic. Watson nodded in satisfaction as details of Torch Town appeared in his eyes following the fusion. All of the buildings were platinum colored, there was not a speck of dust on them. He could even see his own face clearly on the smooth ground. That place had become much more beautiful than the past, and its abilities had also greatly improved. Just the growth and forging abilities could make Torch Town countless times stronger soon. "Can you tell me what is going on? What caused Torch Town to change so drastically?" the residents of Torch Town exclaimed as Watson sighed. Some people even rubbed their eyes, wondering if they were dreaming. Torch Town was in disrepair at one point. Then, it became magnificent, like a castle decked out in crystals and mirrors that only existed in dreams. Torch Town could no longer be called that, it should be known as Platinum City. Who knew if there was a more prosperous town in the entire kingdom? Many of them had mocked Watson. They were amused when Watson did not repair the ground, instead, he built a town outside their town. Then, they were the ones astonished. What should they do if that was not a transformation for their town? Watson had clearly done that to release his magic. They were curious about what spell he had cast and how he could connect the two towns. "Thank you very much, young Master Watson." Lubin was the first person to respond. His expression was unmistakably ecstatic. He had anticipated Watson's ability to repair the town in an instant, but he had not expected Watson not only to restore the town, but to improve it as well. The new Torch Town seemed 10 times stronger than before. He felt at ease because of the Platinum-tier ores embedded in the floor and walls. He wished he could take a few pieces from the ground or the wall and play with them if there were not that many people around him. "Mayor Lubin, you have thanked me far too soon. My transformation is not yet complete." Watson motioned with his hand to Lubin not to get too excited. Then, he snapped his fingers. A black hole appeared in midair with a click. A palm-sized, black rat with a mysterious crown symbol on its head walked out of the black hole and landed on Watson's shoulder. That rat was the previously fused heaven-devouring Rat King. Squeak! The heaven-devouring Rat King opened its mouth and spat out some items, one by one. They were a jumble of old armor, weapons, and daily necessities, such as pots and pans, tables, and chairs. Hundreds of thousands of sundries piled up into a small hill, leaving the Torch Town residents stunned. They could not believe a palm-sized rat had such ample space in its stomach. What surprised them, even more, was that most of what the heaven-devouring Rat King spat out was garbage, and some of it was not even iron-tier items. Some of them had even been shattered into pieces. They had no idea what Watson had planned to do. Did Watson think Torch Town was a garbage dump? Many people were heartbroken when they saw the broken items had soiled the newly merged platinum floor. However, because of their prior experience, they did not ask that question. More than 100,000 refugees in Black Moon Town, including the town's official workers, had destroyed these items. It is not worth it to fuse them or use them with wishes because the quality is too low. The wish for the world ring was similar to the fusion system. Both methods require a small payment for a higher return. A wish would require a gold tier item, and each tier would get different things. The better the payment, the greater the return. Furthermore, there were only 3 chances per day to make a wish. As a result, everyone in Black Moon Town treasured every opportunity, and those items of poor quality were left behind. Those items were already in tatters when they arrived in Black Moon Town, but they were perfectly adequate for the task at hand. "Fusion system," Watson said to the piles of junk on the ground that had been accumulated into a few small hills. The piles of junk vanished in an instant, turning into streaks of light that flew onto the Torch Town residents' bodies. Among those residents were knights in fiery red armor and civilians in simple attires. Their clothes changed immediately after their bodies fused with the light. Ordinary linen robes were transformed into high-quality silk robes with a silver-tier aura, and the armor on the knights' bodies had also improved. They glowed with the faint light that distinguished high-quality items. "What exactly is that light? Why did it land on my body? And what happened to my clothes?" A town resident raised his hands in surprise and looked at the clothes on his body. He had been in clothes made of beast fur, and his clothes had transformed into a long robe, and the black beast fur had also turned silver-colored. A faint shadow of a huge ice-field wolf flashed across the long robe as it was scattered around his neck and limbs, dancing in the wind. It belonged to the silver tier. My armor has also evolved. My previous armor was only bronze tier. It has now turned to gold tier. And so has the long sword I wield. It has the potential to improve the quality of clothing worn by others. What kind of enchantment is that? One of the torch knights took a long sword plated with gold and looked at the armor that had changed from red to gold and shone brightly. His expression was one of surprise and shock. He had been wearing the torch knight's standard armor, but it had undergone a significant change. Not only had the metal on the surface of his armor turned to gold, but 6 golden wings had also sprouted from his back. He appeared powerful and authoritative. Similar exclamations rang out from every Torch Town resident throughout the streets. If Watson had been mentally prepared to fuse and transform Torch Town, then they were utterly dumbfounded. He had attracted a large number of gold-biter rats outside the town and used a lot of platinum-tier ores when he had transformed Torch Town. However, Watson had also used a pile of tattered items, and it had achieved the same effect. He could transform something rotten into something magical. It was fantastic. Furthermore, Watson only needed to hook his finger, and their clothes and weapons were replaced without their knowledge. That was not something one could achieve with an ordinary spell. Those people in Torch Town had no idea how to describe Watson's feat. They preferred the term miracle to magic. Chapter 246, Transforming the Entire Border. Look at my finger, my dear husband. A lady with a lotus leaf hat dressed as a noblewoman stretched her slender right hand outward. The silver ring you gave me is now gold, she said as she pointed to the ring on her index finger that flickered with a golden light. I think it has a strong magical power too. This is at least a silver-tier item. My dear Maria, based on my experience, I am confident that it is a gold-tier ring, a well-dressed man beside the woman said as he tried to suppress his excitement. Really? That's fantastic, my dear husband. The woman clutched the ring tightly in her hand and refused to let go. The medicinal herb shop's young boss behind the couple was taken aback by his shop's drastic transformation. How did all of the herbs in my shop change to the silver tier? There were various herbs on the wall. Some of them radiated a silver light, while others radiated a golden glow. The majority of the herbs had been bronze and iron tier. However, all of them had changed to silver and gold tier. The young owner blinked again. He did not know if he had seen it incorrectly. He had returned to the pharmacy less than a minute ago. He had closed the shop to watch the duel between Watson and Elvira. Watson had just cast a spell that turned Torch Town into a platinum city. His pharmacy, too, had grown from a 1-story bungalow to a 4-story palace. Watson's magic astounded him. He had been concerned about what effect the spell would have on his pharmacy. In the end, it did have an impact, but it was not something he had expected. The hoes and sickles he hung next to the medicinal herb shelves were used to dig for medicinal herbs. Initially, they were not even first-tier grade items, and they were covered in rust. However, they had transformed into silver-tier items that emitted a silver light. This truly is a miracle. He was stunned at first. Then, the young owner revealed an ecstatic expression. His family possessed a plethora of silver-tier items and herbs for no apparent reason. He had no idea how much money he could make if he sold them. Even if he did not sell those items, he could keep them for himself. He assumed he was not the only one whose shop had devolved into that state. As the store owner reflected on that, he looked out the window and at the young man from Black Moon Town. His eyes were filled with gratitude. He did not care when he first heard of Black Moon Town. However, he was enraged when he learned that its young master would fight Elvira. He was confident that Elvira would win. How could a small child from an unknown location compete with Commander Elvira? His perspective changed when he witnessed Watson unleash a terrifying spell powerful enough to destroy the entire town and the magical means to repair it at the same time. Watson deserved more respect than Torch Town's mayor. Many Torch Town residents shared the same sentiments. Most of them had spent their entire lives in Torch Town. They had worked hard to amass some gold coins. However, Watson's spell had turned their clothes into something of higher quality. It was like having a lifetime's worth of wealth in an instant. Elvira stretched her hand outward and knocked on the armor on her body that had been transformed into gold tier. She fell silent as she touched it. Lubin said that she had displayed her cheap sense of honor. She was adamantly unconvinced. She had done what a good knight would have done. She did not think that she was in the wrong before she realized that she had been wrong about that too. She insisted on doing things her way. Torch Town might not have been able to reach that level in 100 years, but Watson had done it in an instant. It would have been fine if she had submitted obediently in the face of such a monster. There was no reason to keep that insignificant dignity. She had not understood Lubin's adoration for Watson, but she had changed her mind. She would bow to him then. Phew! Watson took a deep breath and wiped the sweat from his brow after releasing the system fusion for the second time. The system did not consume his physical strength. However, he had been weak after he released the explosive spell. He had to gasp for air even if he only said a few words. Mayor Lubin, the transformation of Torch Town has been flawless. It is time for me to go as well. If you do not have any other request. Lubin had already approached him with a smile on his face. Young Master Watson, I have not thanked you properly for helping Torch Town make such a big change. It is not proper noble etiquette to chase a guest away after they had helped us. What do you think? At the very least, young Master Watson, you should stay here today and celebrate the rebirth of Torch Town with us. Lubin's fiery red robe emitted a faint golden glow. Watson had conveniently upgraded his clothes to gold tier when he fused the miscellaneous items. Lubin had previously misplaced a few gold tier things in Black Moon Town. He had been heartbroken, but he could only feel joy in his heart at that moment. He was not the only one who had gotten his hands on a gold tier item. Everyone in Torch Town had at least one silver or gold tier item. What did that imply? He had taken out a few gold tier items previously, but at that moment, Torch Town had tens of thousands of similar items. They would have even more of those items in the future. He was no longer bothered by the minor setbacks he had endured in the past. That's okay, Mayor Lubin. I do not feel like eating right now. Watson appeared troubled as he declined Lubin's request politely. He wanted to transform the other towns quickly before returning to Black Moon Town for a much-needed rest. Young Master Watson, you should stay. I am very sincere in my invitation. The people of Torch Town do not want you to leave either. Lubin gripped Watson's hand tightly as if he did not want to let go. Young Master Watson does not wish to remain here, Lubin. Do not invite trouble. Geraint walked out of the crowd at that point, his tone sounded hostile. He did not want Watson to stay in Torch Town. He wanted to witness the scene again in which Watson used system fusion to transform Torch Town. When he imagined that Monty Town would go through the same process, his heart swelled with zeal. How could he let Lubin continue with his actions? Geraint, I do not have time to argue with you right now. This is Torch Town, this is my domain. Do not interfere with my young Master Watson's business. Otherwise, I will have my men evict you from Torch Town. You. Geraint was so enraged that he was on the verge of losing his cool. Suddenly, he felt malicious stares from all directions, prompting him to close his mouth. The Torch Town residents stared at Geraint as if he were a dagger. They said, Young Master Watson, please stay. When you go to the mayor's house, you are welcome to come to my house as a guest. Their expressions became submissive. They would turn a blind eye to Geraint's spat with their mayor. On the other hand, Watson had become a treasure in their eyes ever since they knew about his magic. How could they bear the thought of losing him? I am not sure I want to go. Watson looked up at the lonely Elvira in the crowd when he noticed Lubin clutching him tightly. Then he had an epiphany. Do you remember our bet, Miss Elvira? What bet? Watson's voice was so loud, so Elvira turned her head, and everyone else in the room quieted down as well. They looked at Elvira with interest. It was made before the duel. If I were to lose, then I would leave. And if you do not win, then... Watson came to a halt halfway through, and Elvira's face had turned from pale to red. Her pretty face was flushed with embarrassment. She remembered what Watson had said about the bet. Watson had asked about her action if she were to lose the duel. She told him that she would strip naked and run around the arena. She had said it so casually, she did not expect Watson to remember it. Elvira reached for her chest to undo the gold-tier chainmail and revealed a pair of black shorts and a tight top that showed more than half of her pale skin. Her attractive figure, which had become curvaceous after years of exercise, was incredibly appealing. Many of the men were drawn to her voluptuous figure. Watson's gaze was a little fixed on that too. Elvira gritted her teeth and was about to remove her shorts and top when she heard Watson's voice. "Miss Elvira, what are you doing? Didn't you say you wanted me to keep my promise? Why are you still asking me about what I'm doing? You've misunderstood me, Miss Elvira. I have not finished what I was about to say. I mean to say that you can't fulfill the bet you lost unless you agree to one of my conditions. And that is to persuade Mayor Lubin to let me go. Why didn't you say so earlier?" The color of Elvira's face alternated between green and red. She gritted her teeth as she stared at the helpless Watson with her lovely eyes. Watson, she suspected, had done it on purpose. As a good knight, she would certainly keep her word. However, running naked in public was a little too difficult for her. Watson had given her a way out, so she had no choice but to accept it. After she thought about it for a moment, she said, "Young Master Watson, before the duel, I remember that you had placed 1,000,000 gold coins on a certain bet. According to the odds at that time, you should receive 100 million gold coins for your win. I remember now. There is such a thing, indeed." Watson's eyes lit up, and he nodded as if he was serious. "From the looks of it, I can't transform Torch Town for free. You still owe me 100 million gold coins. Should the mayor pay for that, or would everyone here chip in for the total amount? Why don't you hand over the silver and gold tier items you have on you, and I'll see if it's enough for 100 million gold coins." Everyone froze and turned their heads away awkwardly. They no longer asked him to stay. "Young Master Watson, aren't you heading toward the other towns to help them as well? Hurry along, then. We won't see you off." Lubin quickly let go of Watson's hand. There was a guilty smile on his face. He had let go of Watson when it was about money. How stingy! As he cursed the man in his heart, Watson nodded at Lubin and everyone else. "Then, I shall take my leave. Now that the passage between Torch Town and Black Moon Town is opened, you are welcome to Black Moon Town for leisure or business in the future." After he said his goodbyes, Watson left Torch Town. Antonio and the others followed behind him. Geraint took the lead and rushed out impatiently. "Young Master Watson, is it our town's turn for the next transformation?" André was beside him too, and his eyes were filled with hope. As he glanced at the two of them, Watson thought for a moment and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. I have a better idea." Then, he spread his combat aura wings and flew up toward the sky. He raised his hand and pointed at the ground under his feet. "Wouldn't it be more convenient if I transform the border instead? It would also save me the trouble of running from town to town." Chapter 247, The Isolated Vermillion Town. Vermillion Town. "All of you, hurry up. Her Highness doesn't like people who dawdle." A guard stood outside the mayor's office, urging a few farmers to transfer their belongings to a few carriages. Among the items were priceless murals, books, and a few large boxes. Nobody knew what was inside. Adele, Vermillion Town's mayor, was dressed in a golden and red gown. She leaned against the door, observing everything in front of her with cold eyes. Her ruby-colored eyes glowed with regret. A guard stood next to her. He had golden yellow hair and a dashing appearance. He was sizing her up in the carriage. The handsome guard spoke after a brief moment of hesitation. "Lady Adele, it has been almost a week since the border count sent us an invitation. Is it true that we are not going to Black Moon Town?" The handsome guard's name was La Fise. He was Adele's personal guard. He was a descendant from the Saint Laurent family in the royal city. He was only 24 years old, but he was already a peak silver-tier warrior. It was a long story as to why he was working as a guard. He was a Saint Laurent descendant who had been sent to the border for a gilded post. However, he had only been the mayor for 2 years when a young woman was transferred to take over that position. It was Adele. He had been unconvinced. He went to his family to express his displeasure, but they said nothing. Adele's identity was something out of the ordinary. Furthermore, F.A.T.C.A.T.S got along with Adele, and he discovered that Adele was a capable woman. The doubt in his heart gradually faded. He was eager to take over as captain of the guards. The border count had burned the magical scroll that he had given to Vermillion town a week ago. They received word that all mayors were to travel to Black Moon town. The border count had wanted to declare that Black Moon town would take control of the border. F.A.T.C.A.T.S was present when they received the news. Adele had told him to ignore it, so he did not take it seriously. Unfortunately, he could not do anything about it because the border had undergone earth-shattering changes in just a few days. For starters, there was a 10-meter wide passage just outside Vermillion town. The path was made entirely of platinum-tier ores. No one knew who had constructed that passage. According to the city guards, it had appeared out of nowhere. In addition, a swarm of rats had appeared alongside the route. Those rats had infiltrated Vermillion town and devoured a slew of hot stone veins. The town was well known for its hot stone veins. It would be an extreme inconvenience if they were to lose those veins. However, that was not the case. The rats did not consume all of the hot stone veins. Instead, they left some, and the remaining veins had evolved into super hot stone veins. The super hot stones reigned supreme among hot stone veins. It had a platinum color that set it apart from other hot stone veins. Typically, the vein as a whole might not even produce another one. It contained far more energy than ordinary hot stone veins, and its value was extremely high. The rats had devoured the hot stones and left behind the super hot stones in the past few days. Even though the number of hot stones had been reduced hundreds of times, the price had increased thousands-fold. Many Vermillion town residents referred to those rats as angelic rats. They believed that the gods had sent the rats to assist them. People brought hoes and other tools to the hot stone mineral vein daily. They were willing to destroy a piece of boiling stone to sell it for a profit. Unfortunately, the tools at their disposal did not assist them in extracting the platinum-tier ores. The hoes and weapons they used, on the other hand, were severely damaged. In addition to the super hot stones, a platinum road outside of town had recently been discovered in an unusual location. They did not have to lift their legs to walk, the road would automatically move them when they stood on the road. The speed was 10 times greater than that of a carriage. The town's merchants were overjoyed at the discovery. As they looked at the towns to the north, they realized that they would be able to do business with those towns in the future. Their speed would skyrocket. F.A.T.C.A.T.S remembered his worried expression. Apparently, a pair of invisible hands had infiltrated Vermillion town and gradually changed its environment. He did not know the owner of those hands. He sighed and shifted his gaze toward Adele. The woman lacked cultivation ability, but she was unrivaled in terms of management. Adele was Vermillion town's sole ruler, as opposed to the city hall system. He had asked Adele if she wanted to go to Black Moon town. That was the first time he questioned the mayor's decision. What is Black Moon town? What's the point of going there? Adele did not even turn her head to reply to him. She continued to stare at the goods loaded onto the carriage. It was as if they were essential to her. Well, the border count said that he'd expel us from the border if we don't go to Black Moon town, F.A.T.C.A.T.S explained hesitantly. Also, if you do not intend to go to Black Moon town, why did you ask them to move the things in your office? He asked as he looked at the carriage in front of him. Adele's belongings were in the carriage, including letters, documents, clothes, and daily necessities. Adele wanted to take some of the furniture with her. It was inaccurate to refer to it as a long-distance journey. She appeared to be moving. The border count is merely a symbol. He can't really kick us out. There are only 4 towns on the border, well, 5 towns, including Black Moon Town. Do you know how much those 5 towns pay in taxes each year? About 200,000 gold coins. Adele's tone was soothing. For example, Vermillion Town is required to pay 80,000 gold coins per year, and we pay the highest tax among all the other towns. If they were to lose Vermillion Town, then the taxes would need to be redistributed between the other towns. Do you think the border count would know how to settle that? F.A.T.C.A.T.S realized Adele's words made sense, so he nodded thoughtfully before he asked, "Since we are not going to Black Moon Town, what are your plans, Your Highness?" "I am taking a trip to the royal city. I have a few things to do there. I will be leaving Vermillion Town for about 10 days to a few months. I shall appoint you as the acting mayor." Adele took a transfer document that she had prepared from her bosom and handed it to F.A.T.C.A.T.S. Then, without looking back, she walked toward the horse carriage, which had been partially loaded. "You don't have to carry it anymore. The rest of the things are more valuable, so I'll take them myself." Adele dismissed the farmers who were helping her with the things. She moved the last few boxes onto the carriage and touched the veins on the boxes. Waves of emotions rose in her red eyes. Her original name was not Adele. It was only her alias after she went to the border. In fact, she was part of the king's entourage. She was at the border to monitor the border count. She had asked the king for further instructions a week ago when the Dragonspine Snow Mountain was destroyed, and the border count had gone to support Black Moon Town. She would always receive those instructions in the basement of her house. So, she renovated the city hall and murdered the person who constructed the secret room. The king's response to her was straightforward. There were only 2 words. Evacuate immediately. Typically, the king's orders were quite lengthy. She did not understand why it was so simple at that time. Perhaps the border count had discovered her true identity and wanted to capture her, but that did not make sense. He would have made a move on her a long time ago if he had wanted to do that. Furthermore, she had been waiting for a few days, and the border count had not sent anyone there. It meant that the other party was still unaware of her identity. It would be interesting if the king asked her to return under such circumstances. She had no idea if her mission was completed or if the king intended to assign her some other missions. Adele shook her head, putting an end to her rambling thoughts. It would be a lie to say that she did not feel hesitant to control Vermillion Town after she had lived there for so long. However, she could not defy the king's orders. "All right, let's go." Adele climbed into the carriage without further hesitation and directed the coachman to begin driving out of town. She heard that there was a new tunnel outside the city that could transport people to distant locations independently. Even in the royal city, she had never seen such an unusual tunnel. She decided to give it a shot. F.A.T.C.A.T.'s face was filled with disappointment as he watched Adele enter the carriage. He cradled the transfer document that Adele had given him, but he did not read it. Adele would only be gone for a few days. That was good news. If she were gone for longer, he would not bear his longing for her. She must have a good reason to be at the royal city, so he had no reason to stop her. F.A.T.C.A.T.S, whose gaze followed Adele's carriage discreetly, saw her carriage reach the platinum passage that connected the gates. Eventually, the carriage became a small black dot before it disappeared into the distance. It made him feel uneasy. He had developed an aversion to the enigmatic platinum passage. Could Adele leave slowly if that passage was not so magical? Just as he was about to say something, he noticed the carriage that had turned into a black dot had returned at an even faster speed. Adele poked her head out from the coach. He was about to greet her when he noticed her face was twisted with fear. She pleaded with the coachman frantically. "Change your route as soon as possible. I am leaving the border today, so hurry up." "What is the matter, Miss Adele?" He waved his hand to clear the dust stirred by the carriage. He had a puzzled expression on his face. He hesitated for a moment, but he did not go after Adele. Instead, he turned around and made his way to the Platinum Passage. That passage had appeared a few days ago, but he had yet to use it. He wanted to go through it and see what had caused Adele to panic. She would always maintain a poker face no matter what had happened. That was the first time he had seen Adele go through such intense emotional turmoil. A platinum shield appeared on Lo Fi's body as he stood in the passage. Following that, a powerful force transmitted and caused him to move forward quickly. That did not make him feel uneasy. On the contrary, it made him feel extremely at ease. There is nothing here. What did Miss Adele see that caused her to look like that? He continued to ponder after advancing for a few minutes until he felt that he had advanced for more than 10 kilometers. Suddenly, his vision turned black. It was as if something was blocking the sunlight. He raised his head unconsciously and saw a scene that made his face pale. There was a mountain in front of him. It was even more magnificent than Dragonspine Snow Mountain, and it stretched across more than half of the border. The most important thing was that the mountain was floating in the sky. Chapter 248, Creation Mountain. The mountain's peak pierced through the clouds. It was difficult to put into words how magnificent it was. It was not an exaggeration to call it a divine mountain. Colorful rainbow bridges connected many beautiful palaces on the mountainside of the divine mountain. Floating platforms surround the rainbow bridges. They were either filled with diamond-like fruit trees or weapons of various kinds. There were also dark cannon barrels on some of the platforms. Even though they were a few hundred meters apart, they were clearly visible from the ground. Those platforms floated on their own accord. They would occasionally turn in another direction as if they were patrolling the surroundings and ensuring the divine mountain's safety. Outside those platforms were rolling clouds, and the faint roars of magical beasts could be heard from within. Lo Fi's noticed a giant diamond-encrusted dragon and an ice flower-encrusted phoenix flew by. The magical beast he saw vanished as he rubbed his eyes. Only the peak remained in the clouds. He wondered if he was dreaming. Even though it was winter, there was only light snow in the sky, and the sun was a deep red. The divine mountain in front of him was unaffected. The snowflakes would melt as soon as they entered the sky above the divine mountain. The mountain and the outside world appeared to be worlds apart. Furthermore, the walls of the sacred mountain facing Lo Fi's were platinum in color. A platinum staircase extended down from the foot of the floating mountain to the ground and then toward Vermillion town. The mountain's east side was green. It grew lush vegetation, and a massive eagle with its wings spread was carved into the mountain. He recognized it as the symbol of Monty Town's wind eagle. The free wind blew through the forest. On the other side of the mountain, he saw a massive cliff with lava that fell like a waterfall. Pinging sounds echoed from the platinum palaces on the other side as if someone was forging a divine artifact, and there was a large red torch pattern at the top of the mountain. Lo Fi's could not see what was on the back of the mountain from the northern side, but he guessed that it was something quite extraordinary. That divine mountain that spanned more than half the border was unique on every side, like a celestial kingdom left behind by a god in the human world. Am I dreaming? Lo Fi's muttered to himself. He realized why Adele had such a terrified expression on her face. He was horrified as well when he saw what was in front of him. The presence of such a majestic divine mountain made him feel small, especially while in the platinum tunnel. His fear grew as the tunnel rose automatically and gradually approached the divine mountain. His legs could not stop trembling. A bright color flashed across his eyes at that moment. It had a hint of blue to it. He lowered his head. He would have already climbed tens of meters up the platinum passage. He realized at that point that the entire floating mountain range was not land. The original land had become a vast ocean. The blue sea surface reflected the dim sunlight, causing strange colors to refract. Thick white fog floated on the sea's surface, so Lo Fi's missed the fact that the land in front of him had turned into an ocean. There seemed to be a huge black ship floating in the sea. Countless black shadows floated beside it, and the voices of the dead could be heard. If the mountain in the sky was magnificent and could make people think of a godly kingdom, then the sea underneath it was the polar opposite. It felt as if it would bring endless fear and death. Fa-T-S felt suffocated as he stared at the sea for a while and quickly averted his gaze. He became acutely aware of a problem. The border had changed dramatically. The original land had become the sea, and the ground was floating in the sky. Who had done all that? Was it a deity? There was one more point. Fa-T-S noticed the patterns of Monty Town and Torch Town on the mountain. That proved that those two towns were either on the mountain or were related to it. However, Vermillion Town remained in its original location, with only a descending staircase leading to its entrance. What happened? Is it possible that the border count intends to expel Vermillion Town from the border? Fa-T-S thought back to what the border count had said a few days before that. Those who did not travel to Black Moon Town would be expelled from the border. During those days, the border count had not sent anyone to Vermillion Town, and with Adele's explanation, he felt that the border count's previous threats were just words. However, he changed his mind as he stood in front of the Divine Mountain. He realized that Vermillion Town had been dismissed. Only Vermillion Town remained beneath the Divine Mountain after the other towns had all converged on it. What was the distinction between that and exile? However, he did not understand it. The border was not like that a few days ago. How did the world change so drastically in such a short period? Even a platinum-tier elite could not accomplish such a feat, right? Did a god descend into the world to establish his divine kingdom? Fa-T-S could not stop muttering to himself. He crossed his hands in front of his chest. He was not a devout believer, but he muttered a prayer at that moment. While his thoughts raced, he had already ascended the platinum stairs to the Divine Mountain's summit. The first thing that caught his eye was a neatly organized manor. The manor's walls were forged with platinum-tier walls, and the houses inside were large palaces. Perhaps they were not palaces. He saw a luxuriously dressed manor owner dissatisfied with the palace's location. He ordered the palace to transform into a massive giant rock golem and ascend from the ground. There was a large area of farmland outside the manor, and more than a dozen farmers were on the farmland. Fa-T-S was not sure if he should call those people farmers because they were dressed in glittering golden robes that appeared to be gold-tier armor, and the hoes in their hands seemed to be gold-tier as well. The wheat seedlings grew taller as they worked the field. Even the wheat that grew was different, every grain was perfectly clear. It is as one would expect from a country built by the gods. Even the farmland is unique. It's not just the quality of the wheat, the growth rate alone is incomparable to other crops. Fa-T-S exclaimed as he gazed at the farmland scenery. There were numerous such manors visible from the top of the mountain. The higher they rose, the more beautiful they became. The farmer attended to the farmland as he flashed a starlight ring in his hand in front of the manor on the upper level. After a while, the previously empty farmland was filled with rich wheat. Fa-T-S was stunned. He also noticed a few knights fighting on the specially designed training field. One of the knights shattered the weapon in his hand. Then, he twisted his starlight ring, and a brand new gold longsword appeared in his hand. Fa-T-S swallowed his saliva because he was thirsty. He realized that almost everyone there wore a ring on their finger as if it were the Divine Mountain's symbol. He was thirsty, and when he looked up, he discovered that the trees by the roadside were brimming with fruits of two different colors. One was as hot as the sun, the other as bright as the moon, and both had a delicate fragrance. The power in his body seemed to grow when he smelled it. He walked toward the tree and picked one of the golden red fruits. A voice from the side interrupted him. "You entered from the outside, right? Are you here to conduct business?" Fa-T-S turned around. The person who spoke to him was a farmer who had just finished working on the farmland. He was holding a gold-tier hoe and wiping his sweat with a similarly gold-tier towel draped around his neck. There was a friendly smile on his face. Fa-T-S was a little nervous, despite his handsome face. Almost all of the farmers there were ridiculously attractive, leading him to believe that it was the land of the gods. He mumbled, "Yes, I entered from the outside. I am curious if you are a god's servant." A God's servant. The farmer's face changed to a strange expression when he heard his words. Then, he laughed loudly, raising his brows. This place is called the Creation Mountain, and I am a servant here. I'm not a God's servant because young Master Watson was the one who built Creation Mountain. He is a great existence, comparable to a god. Black Moon Town? Black Moon Town built that place? As if struck by lightning, Lo-Fi's mouth was wide open. He imagined that a god had descended and transformed the border. Black Moon Town was only a new border faction. How could it have such a method? It did not make sense, not even with the help of the border count. Platinum-tier structures and floors, gold-tier armor and weapons, and fruit crops of the same quality. The total value of those properties was most likely comparable to the entire kingdom. The border had always been known as the poorest place in the kingdom. However, look at that place then. Even the capital was not particularly wealthy. You do not appear to be here on business. You must have inadvertently barged into this location. The fruit in your hand is a sun fruit, a specialty of Black Moon Town. If you eat it, you will gain the strength of a gold-tier elite. These items are available for free in Black Moon Town. However, if an outsider wishes to enjoy them, they must pay for it, the farmer said as he smiled and pointed at the fruit in Lo-Fi's hand. It has the ability to turn a person into a gold-tier elite? Is there such a magical fruit in the world? Lo-Fi was skeptical, but he still asked, how much is this fruit? It is not expensive. Only 100 gold coins per person. 100 gold coins are not expensive. Lo-Fi endured the heartache as he took 100 gold coins from his pocket and handed them to the farmer. He decided to give it a shot after hearing the farmer speak in such a mysterious manner. He had been stuck at the peak of the silver tier for years, with no signs of ever becoming a gold tier warrior. He guessed that the farmer would not lie to him, they appeared to be quite wealthy. If the farmer had lied to him, he would not let it go so easily. Lo-Fi stuffed the sun's fruit into his mouth with that thought in mind. As soon as he bit into the fruit, it melted. A sweet fragrance and a majestic power surged into his body, causing him to moan contentedly. His back was adorned with a pair of blue and another pair of golden combat aura wings. A powerful golden aura descended on him instantly. Chapter 249, The Busy Watson. That. I have entered the gold tier. Lo-Fi was in disbelief and ecstasy as he looked down at his hand. When he turned around, his joy turned to shock. I have also awakened the light elemental combat aura, and I have light elemental combat aura wings. What's going on? He had only had water elemental combat aura talent, but he had changed to a dual element warrior, and he was much stronger than before that. One of the sun fruit's effects was the awakening of the light elemental combat aura talent. You will awaken your dark elemental combat aura if you consume the moon fruit. As they are not that important, I forgot to mention them, the farmer said from the side. He could awaken a new combat aura talent? How was that not important? Lo-Fi wanted to slap the farmer, but he knew that the farmer was likely right because he had seen how a few other farmers were thirsty after they finished their work as he ate the fruit. They had casually picked a few fruits from a nearby tree and placed them in their mouths. They ate them casually, so it was apparent that they ate those fruits all the time. You said that a man named Watson from Black Moon Town had founded Creation Mountain. What happened to him? Take me to him, please. Those farmers are fruits that could turn one into a gold tier elite for no reason at all, it made Lo-Fi's heart bleed. Plus, such a potent fruit was only 100 gold coins each. If he purchased them reasonably, there would be no problem if he wanted to arm Vermillion Town. He really wanted to see Watson, and he wanted to know why Watson was so extravagant and how he made those priceless items. Black Moon Castle was the highest level of Creation Mountain. You said you are Vermillion Town's acting mayor, and you want to talk to me about something important. Watson stood in a garden in front of Black Moon Castle's entrance. He wiped his sweat as he held a platinum-colored longsword in his right hand and a gold-tiered towel in his left. He had been practicing his swordsmanship just moments before that. Are you Watson? Fa-T.S looked at the teenager in front of him, surprised. He told the farmer at the base of the Creation Mountain that he wanted to meet Watson, so the farmer had kindly sent him up. The scenery he saw along the way surprised him even more. From the bottom of the mountain to the peak, there were 3 levels in total. The lowest level was where he encountered the manor owner and the farmer. The town area was on the 2nd level. Monty Town was to the east, Torch Town was to the west, and Fairy Town was to the north. There were no towns on the south side. Those 3 towns had undergone significant transformations in comparison to the past. Outside those towns were platinum-tier city walls. The houses looked more luxurious than the manor on the 3rd level. Residents were dressed to the nines as they walked around the town. Those residents were dressed in at least gold-tier clothing and wore rings with starlight flowing on their hands. He would not have believed that the towns similar to Vermillion Town in the past had undergone such drastic changes if he had not known some of the officials of Monty Town and Torch Town. Then, he was on the 3rd level. It was the highest point on Creation Mountain. That location was at least 10,000 meters above the ground. The air was thin, and the temperature was dangerously low. Even though he had only become a gold-tier warrior that day, he could not stand being in such a hostile environment. At that level, there were only 2 buildings. One of them was Black Moon Castle, and the other was the Fairy Castle, which housed the border count. The former was entirely black. The structures were shaped like a crescent moon. There were training grounds, breeding grounds, and palaces for servants. The latter was a yellow spiked structure, and it was directly across the street from Black Moon Castle. There were also numerous gardens. Maids could be seen all over the place. They were constructing branches and leaves as beautiful birds and butterflies whizzed by them. Creation Mountain's 3-story structure looked extremely shocking. He estimated at least 1 million people lived there. That accounted for nearly all of the people on the border. One of them was in charge of the entire border. The divine mountain in the sky was shocking enough, but Watson shocked him even more. Was he not only a 10-year-old child? That is right. My name is Watson. The thoughts that ran through Fa-T.S head seemed to persist a long time, but they only lasted a split second. When Watson heard the question, he casually placed a towel, which he used to wipe his sweat, on his shoulder. He said calmly, "I don't know what you have to discuss with me, acting mayor. I am running out of time. I'm pressed for your time. If you have something to say, it's best to keep it short." Watson's tone was calm, but his body exuded authority. Fa-T.S was rendered speechless by that bearing. It had nothing to do with physical strength. It was subconscious respect for those in positions of power. He did not, however, believe everything Watson said. Watson was cultivating when he appeared. He appeared to be unconcerned and unoccupied. Watson explained that it was most likely because he did not respond to a call from the border count some time ago, giving them an excuse to be dissatisfied with him. Fa-T.S grumbled discreetly. He would have persuaded Adele to go there and sign a contract with Black Moon Town if he had known that Black Moon Town was so powerful and could build a divine mountain that could carry more than half of the border's population. Unfortunately, Adele had already left. He could only establish contact with Black Moon Town if he took the initiative to do so. He reasoned that Adele would not hold it against him. As he was about to say something, a dignified voice came from outside the garden, where Watson stood. "Are you finished with your training, Watson? I am confused about a few aspects of the absolute explosion spell you taught me. It's not only me, even Master is having some problems. For example, how does the absolute explosion cause a chain explosion? Could the spell alter the nature of the objects? I attempted to change the stone's nature, but it did not explode." 2 people walked out of the place where the voice was heard. One of them had platinum hair and a handsome face that did not look human. He held a magic staff that shone with diamond-colored light. The other person was not a human at all, He had pointy elf ears under his purple hair. Fa-Fi's eyes widened as he noticed the visitors, particularly the one who appeared to be an elf. "Is that Lord Sylvan, the border count?" he exclaimed inwardly. He had been fortunate to see Sylvan when the border count went to Vermillion town. However, who was that next to him? Lord Sylvan had called him master. Was he the kingdom's greatest mage, the astrologer? It was not possible. Those two individuals had stated that they wished to consult Watson. Why would the person next to the border count need to consult Watson if he was the astrologer? The man was supposed to have vast knowledge. Lord Sylvan, master. The absolute explosion is a diamond-tier move. Its purpose is to control the rules and does not affect the object's nature. Obviously, a stone can't be transformed into gold. Watson waved his hand and picked up a stone from the ground. He applied a layer of gold powder to the stone with magic. A stone can't be turned into gold, but I can apply a layer of gold powder to its surface to make it appear gold. It is the same as the absolute explosion. Apply a layer of rules to anything that can't explode to make the rules on the surface explode. Watson gave the golden medal to Sylvan. The older man took it and looked at it for a few seconds before revealing an expression of comprehension. Antonio, who stood next to him, stroked his beard and smiled. "Watson, that explanation is very simple to grasp. It appears that you are a good candidate to be a teacher like me in the future. The principle of absolute explosion is something I am familiar with. I will go back and talk to Sylvan about it. You may resume with your training, Watson." Antonio and Sylvan exited the garden excitedly as they spoke. They did not look up when they passed Fa-Fi's, as if they had not noticed him. Fa-Fi's opened his mouth to greet the two important figures. Unfortunately, he had paused for a moment, and before he could say anything, the other parties had already exited the garden. "Young Master Watson, are you there? You must explain something to me." They heard a woman's voice crying out in the garden as Sylvan was about to leave. Then a woman with freckles on her face rushed in, exuding a youthful aura. Her emerald green robe had tree veins crisscrossed on it. It appeared to be made of a special tree. The woman held an emerald green magical staff with a faint image of a terrifying magical beast on it. A rough-looking man in a similar green robe stood behind the woman. He scratched his hair helplessly. "What do you want, Anna, Ron?" Watson inquired. Anna, the Mage Guild president in Monty Town, and Ron, the Northwind mercenary group leader, stood in front of them. The two had become Black Moon Town slaves. However, the two had been reinstated to their original positions because of their excellent performance. Watson had also given them a platinum-tier Shadow of the World Tree item and a wish for the World Ring. They had already reached the peak of the gold tier. They could even fight platinum-tier elites with the addition of the two platinum-tier items. Anna snorted lightly and looked at Ron when she heard Watson's question. "It is all Ron's fault. Thank you for your kindness, young Master Watson. Monty Town is now on Creation Mountain, and the Mage Guild has grown tenfold. Everyone has been given platinum-tier items and can eat gold-tier food daily. We had never dared to imagine such a life before this. The Mage Guild decided to treat you to a meal tonight as a way of repaying your kindness, young Master Watson. However, Ron said that the Northwind mercenary group would treat you to a meal as well. He even requested that we change the date. Please make a decision for us. Anna, who would know that you'd be treating young Master Watson to dinner tonight? Please be patient and change it to another day. Today, we must come first. My group has purchased many phoenix eggs and used the wish for the world ring to raise the meat of a few gold-tier magical beasts to platinum-tier. We are roasting the meat right now. It would all go to waste if young Master Watson doesn't come to dinner tonight." Chapter 250, A Starlight-tier Building. Meat from a platinum-tier magical beast? Watson did not react to Ron's words, while Fa-Fi's had a look of disbelief on his face. Fa-Fi's had only heard of and had never seen a platinum-tier magical beast. Such a powerful magical beast did not need to guard the house and was worshipped as one's ancestor. However, they had chosen to roast a platinum-tier beast's meat on the stove. Was that not a little extravagant? No, that was beyond the realms of luxury, one could say it was insane. Laphise heard Anna's explanation before he could recover from the shock of Ron's words. Do not try that on me, Ron. We've prepared many things for young Master Watson. We've used our wishes to upgrade some of the sun and moon gems we've chosen to platinum tier. We also went to Master Antonio specifically to inquire about obtaining water from the Spring of Life, and we've also successfully extracted a small bottle with his assistance. You should be aware that exposing the Spring of Life to air for a few hours will cause it to lose its effect and turn into ordinary water. So, young Master Watson, you must come with us. They were not only walking about platinum-tier magical beast meat, but there was also the Spring of Life. Laphise could not help but look around him. He heard that the Spring of Life was a mysterious stream of water in the Elven Kingdom in the south. If one were to drink from the Spring of Life, they would be immortal. However, that person's strength would be frozen to that moment for eternity. There were some side effects, but its benefits outweighed everything else. Unfortunately, the Elven Kingdom was very protective of the Spring of Life. The king had sent people to the Elven Kingdom several times to request a bottle of water from the Spring of Life to extend his life, but they were all turned down. Only Antonio had drunk from the Spring of Life. He had no idea how Anna, the woman in front of him, had managed to get it. That was something that not even the king could accomplish. If you do that, Anna, I will go all out. Worst case scenario, I will have just wasted the wishes I made today. When I return, I will make a wish to transform the platinum-tier meat into the meat from a dragon and a phoenix of equal level. Okay, then the Mage Guild will forfeit all our wishes today. We will work hard to eliminate the side effects of the Spring of Life so that young Master Watson can live an everlasting life without any curses. Ron and Anna stared at each other and fought incessantly, like when Emperor Cluck fought with the Golden Flash. Laphise was already perplexed during that process. Even the dragons and phoenixes would want to rid themselves of the after effects of the Spring of Life. How would he not understand what they said? Okay, let's call it a day. I recommend combining the feasts. Whether they are mercenaries or mages, they are all part of Monty Town, part of Creation Mountain. It makes no difference who invites me. I will be available around 6 in the evening. I will also take my family to the banquet that you have planned. Is that all right? Watson motioned with his hand. He stood helplessly as Anna and Ron argued. Very well, we shall do as you wish, young Master Watson. Anna's face was slightly dissatisfied, but she still spoke respectfully. She had not seen Watson in a long time, ever since he sent her and Ron back to Monty Town to help with the transformation. Unlike the others, the Mage Guild had tried to harm Black Moon Town. She had to pay more, and the only way she could improve her standing in Watson's eyes was to work harder. The banquet was an excellent opportunity for the nobles to get to know one another. It was all Ron's fault that her plan had gone awry. Anna snorted softly and walked out of the garden in a huff as she glared at Ron. No matter what she did, Ron always seemed to oppose her. She had planned to invite Watson to the banquet first, but Ron insisted on interfering, transforming a noble and elegant gathering of mages into a vulgar gathering of warriors. It is inappropriate for Miss Anna and Sir Ron to argue about who should treat young Master Watson to a meal. If you can't decide who is better, perhaps you can give Torch Town a chance. The mayor of Torch Town, Lubin, and Gerant walked toward the garden together, accompanied by hearty laughter. Greetings, Lord Mayors. Anna and Ron bowed respectfully in the direction of the newcomers. Gerant adjusted the white flower he wore on his chest. With a slight sigh of dissatisfaction, he said, Lubin, you have guts. Monty Town invited young Master Watson to a banquet today, what does it have to do with Torch Town? Stay at the back of the queue. Then, Gerant approached Watson, took a stack of documents from his pocket, and handed them to the younger man. This is Monty Town's income over the last few days. According to your plan, the town will primarily grow high-quality fruits, crops, and medicinal herbs. The majority of the medicinal herbs in Monty Town are now gold tier, with only a small percentage remaining silver tier. I estimate there are more than 100,000 medicinal herbs, with a total value of 10 million gold coins. Torch Town is roughly the same. You have assigned forging to us. Furthermore, you have distributed the wish for the world ring to the entire world. We only need to make a wish during the forging process, so it is extremely convenient. We made a net profit of 10 million gold coins in just a few days. 100,000 of those can be used as tax for the kingdom this year. As for the rest of the money, he chuckled. Lubin did not finish his sentence, but everyone understood what he meant. After he had earned 10 million gold coins in a few days, he would only give 1% of it to the kingdom, keeping the rest for himself. Lubin realized the kingdom's system was a fart after they became Black Moon Town's ally. Although the kingdom did not have as much money as Black Moon Town, it was more exploitable. They would demand a large amount of taxes from them every year, unlike in Black Moon Town, where Watson would not take a single cent of their earnings as long as they spent them in Black Moon Town. Lubin's heart was overjoyed. Suddenly, he noticed a golden-haired guard next to Watson. He had not paid much attention to him at first because he assumed he was only a guard in the castle. Then he realized that person looked familiar to him. Furthermore, the armor on his body was not typical of the Black Moon Knights. Young Master Watson, if I am not mistaken, the person beside you is a captain from Vermillion Town F.A.T.C.A.T.S. The mayors on the border were in contact to some extent. As Torch Town's mayor, he had been to Vermillion Town. Furthermore, F.A.T.C.A.T.S was Adele's personal guard and a noble from the Saint Laurent family from the royal capital. So, he had a strong impression of him. Long time no see, Mayor Lubin. F.A.T.C.A.T.S took a deep breath, his face a little awkward. He did not want Lubin to meet him like that. Lubin, who had a platinum ring on his hand and a gold-tier suit, had talked about tens of millions of gold coins. Then he looked at himself, a mere guard who had just been appointed as the acting mayor. The gap was too big. F.A.T.C.A.T.S had believed that Vermillion Town was the best of the four towns. However, he had changed his mind. Vermillion Town was at the bottom. It had already pulled away from the other towns by a considerable distance. Are you also here to become a subsidiary of Black Moon Town, F.A.T.C.A.T.S? The border count gathered all the mayors a few days ago, but Vermillion Town did not attend. That was why your town was excluded from the border fusion team. Of course, it is not too late to join now. By the way, where is Miss Adele? Why isn't there any sign of her? Lubin looked around F.A.T.C.A.T.S as if he was searching for Vermillion Town's mayor. Miss Adele went to the royal city to attend to some matters. I am not sure when she will return. I am now the acting mayor in Vermillion Town. What could be more important than becoming a member of Black Moon Town? Adele should still be on her way to the royal city. She is not very good at business. If this continues, it will be extremely difficult for Vermillion Town to establish itself on the border. But that's only my opinion. Lubin's heartfelt words broke F.A.T.C.A.T.'s heart. He would have retorted angrily if he had heard someone disparage Adele, but he had nothing to say at the time. All right, everyone, let's get right to the point. Watson cut in and looked at F.A.T.C.A.T.S. Mr. F.A.T.C.A.T.S, as you can see, I am very busy. What is the purpose of your visit? Can you tell me now? I would like to purchase some sun and moon gems that grow on the mountain, F.A.T.C.A.T.S stuttered. If it had been when he first went up the mountain, he might have been very confident in confronting Watson and even asked why Watson was so wasteful. However, he learned that Creation Mountain's strength was beyond his imagination. He could not say anything because Watson had the resources to spend. Was it only that? Watson remained silent for a brief moment before smiling. He motioned toward Lubin and Gerant. I will have to bother you to send this gentleman from Vermillion Town on his way. Young Master Watson, why are you driving me away? Don't you want to earn some money? Or do you believe that Vermillion Town can't afford to purchase the fruits? It is not that I don't want to make money or that I think you are stupid. It is just that the sun and moon gems that you want to purchase are too cheap. They are simply wild fruits on Creation Mountain. Even the farmers and servants can enjoy them as they please. If you want to buy them, then you can forget about that. I can't earn anything, and you'll be wasting your time. Who would pull weeds from the ground and sell them as a commodity? Those two fruits were like weeds to Watson. Watson had considered those items to be valuable a few days ago. However, the situation had changed in those few days. After they left Torch Town, he requested that the border count notify all of the manors at the border to tell them not to be afraid no matter what they saw. Then, with Black Moon Town as the focal point, he fused the entire border, which resulted in Creation Mountain. Even though the border was small, it covered thousands of kilometers and contained a wealth of resources. One could only imagine the kind of changes that would occur if all of those resources were fused. There was a qualitative change when that happened, similar to how he created the absolute explosion spell when he merged all of his abilities. Creation Mountain was a structure that had broken through Diamond Tier and reached the Starlight-tier.